Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Genevieve Eason. I'm the Executive Director of Wilton Youth Council, and we appreciate you making time for this morning. I want to thank our sponsor, the Kiwanis Club of Wilton, for making this possible. They have a new family membership program, so please visit their website to learn more about that. And also, I owe a huge thank you to the chairs of Wilton Youth Council's Parent Education Committee, Carrie Ann Finelli and Heather DiBenedetto-Reading, for everything they do to bring these programs to the community. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel soon. You can also find our Fathers Forum on fathering in the pandemic and our conversation about free play and independence with Lenore Skenazy of Let Grow on our channel. And I'm so pleased to introduce to you this morning Dr. Alicia Farrell. Dr. Farrell is an accomplished cognitive psychologist, professional speaker, and founder of Clearview Consulting. She spent 9 years as a university professor, was twice a fellowship award recipient in support of her research on wisdom, and is a published research scientist and expert problem solver. Her life's work is to educate and coach people and organizations on how to maximize brain power and solve problems. She also has a private practice working with teens, adults, couples, and families who want to make healthy and durable changes in their life. Dr. Farrell brings over 20 years of expertise and passion to her work. We're so pleased to bring Dr. Farrell to you today and look forward to her guidance on how we can all manage our screens during these unusual times. There will be time for her to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So please look to the bottom of your screen. There you'll see the Q&A function, and that's the place to submit your questions, and you can enter them at any time during the presentation, and they'll be there ready for us when we get to that part. Welcome, Alicia. We're so happy to have you here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So I am going to turn off my camera, and then everyone will see Alicia on their screen, and we'll go through your presentation. And then when you're ready for Q&A, let me know. I'll turn my camera back on, and I'll start reading you our questions.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Thank you, Genevieve.
Okay, thank you.
So welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about a very challenging topic today. My plan is to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then I'll open it up for questions, and we'll go from there. So I have to say that being in private practice during this period of time has been really educational for me and eye-opening. I've been on the emotional front lines of this situation that we're dealing with COVID and with the other unrest in our country. And I appreciate, I understand, and am experiencing myself the difficulty of this time. So I want you guys to all know that we're in this together. And hopefully my goal today is to give you some guidelines around screen use during the summertime and beyond with your kids, as well as some practical guidelines and ways of talking to your kids about it, and also some philosophical underpinnings that we can use with our kids and with ourselves to try to stay grounded to the best of our ability right now. So the way I'm going to start is I'll talk a little bit about the unique mental health challenge that we're faced with in this day and age. And then we'll talk specifically about guidelines for children around technology. And then we'll talk about practical and philosophical tips for managing your children during the summer and going into the fall and beyond. So let's first talk about the mental health challenge that we're faced with right now. And we're all coping with an enormous amount of uncertainty. And we're in uncertain times. It's unprecedented, as we all continue to say. This is just such an unprecedented situation that we're all in, and we really have very little control over what's happening to us, and no definitive end in sight, which makes it, from an emotional perspective, very challenging. And you may be experiencing, as I'm seeing throughout the course of this, changes in how you feel about being isolated and and feeling at risk on a regular basis, and having the other influences of this situation, the expected influences that this situation is having on our lives. And it really is a story that we can't tell yet, which is also very challenging for us emotionally. You know, we, as humans, we like to be able to tell a story around our experiences. And we don't really know the full extent of what it is we're experiencing or what's going to happen in the future. And neither does anybody else really. And so and that's one of the things that really makes this situation quite unprecedented. What is ordinary about this situation is the way that we are emotionally reacting to it. So when you're faced with situations in your life where you feel at risk, but there isn't a lot you can do about it, you feel the way that we do. So you have moments where you might feel empowered, you might feel grounded, you have moments where you don't, you feel at risk. You may be experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety. Your children may be experiencing that as well. And you may find yourselves emotionally just kind of riding that roller coaster, which is completely normal for us. We are actually, and our children are built for experiences like this. We're built to have grit and resilience. The thing that makes what we're experiencing now particularly unprecedented and challenging is that we have so little control, and there's nothing we can do about to change the situation itself that we're in, and it's dragging on, and that's something that is not normal for us. So we're really and in addition to that, our ability to respond to those feelings is somewhat limited because of the fact that we are isolated and we don't have the same outlets that we would normally have. So to finish up this section of the talk about the mental health challenge, I just want to let you guys know that none of us are at our best right now, including our children. And I want to encourage all of you to just be gentle. Just be gentle on yourselves, be gentle on your children, be gentle on your loved ones. The emotions that we're experiencing are often coming out sideways. So, you know, your child may do something that they would normally do and you'd have patience around it. And instead, you know, you react as if they've lit the house on fire. That is very normal, and we have to accept that as part of the experience that we're having, and have some patience around it, have some grace around it. And I'll give you a few philosophical tips at the end of the presentation to help you with that. Okay, so one of the many challenges that we faced in the spring with our kids, and we're facing now in the summer, and we will continue to face most likely in the academic year in the fall and potentially the winter, is managing our children's use of technology. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. This is not a new issue. In fact, Genevieve had hired me to come speak to you before all this craziness happened. We had a talk planned. We all know that managing our children's use of technology has become challenging, beyond challenging really, in the last 5 to 8 years. And kind of like the pandemic, we still don't know a whole lot about the influence that technology has on our children's development, although we're seeing some very strong trends that are not real positive. And I'll go into a little bit of that today as well. So right now, it's kind of like this issue on steroids, because in the spring, and then again coming up in the fall, most likely the kids will be spending much more time, academic time, online, and then you add to that any recreational time, and we're looking at upwards of 7, 8, 9 hours a day in front of a screen. And so screen time has actually gone up since the pandemic instead of going down. So, so understand that we're really handling some new developmental challenges without a lot of experience and a lot of concrete knowledge. And the solutions to these issues feel inadequate a lot of the time. And you're going to realize that as I'm giving you suggestions and guidelines, some of which are going to sound very unrealistic, some of which are going to sound very inadequate. And it's something else that we have to accept about the time that we're in, that the solutions to too much screen time or inappropriate content are challenged by a lot of other unintended elements in our lives, and we just have to accept that we've got to do our best. We're not looking at getting this perfect. We just have to make an effort to do the best that we can, and understand also that our children do have this built in. They're born with this grit and resilience, and most likely, you know, if your kids have a week where they spend an enormous time on the screen, and another week where they may not, they're going to be okay in the long run. So what we're really trying to do right now is just make sure that they're not living their lives in the extreme in terms of time and content on social media and beyond. So the other thing that I want to say to set the stage for the technology conversation is that even though I'm going to give you some guidelines, that some of which are relatively specific, I want you to understand that that when you're making decisions around your children in technology, do so based on your child. So some of these decisions are going to be very idiosyncratic based on your child's age, their level of maturity, and their temperament. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But so I want you guys to all know that I honor the fact that you need to make parenting decisions based on how your family functions and based on how each one of your children tend to present to the world. So, all right, so there's two general areas of concern and importance when it comes to technology. One is the amount of time that your children spend in front of a screen, and a screen is everything from your television set to the iPad to the laptop to the telephone, anything that has a screen, okay? And as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to give you some guidelines, and they're going to sound extremely unrealistic. Before I do so, I want to talk about some hard stops, what I call hard stops. And these are things that I feel in relation to technology and children should be non-negotiable. So these are things that you bring to the table to your kids and say, this is kind of how we function as a family. And for very important reasons. So one such hard stop is no technology in the bedroom. With the exception of teens, obviously teens are most likely going to be in their bedrooms, either on their phones or their computers, doing work and interacting with their friends and stuff like that. So you can relax some of those guidelines as your children start to move into their teen years. I'd be careful about it, and I'd make sure that there was a time requirement, so they had to be off of technology at 10 o'clock, or at least have it out of the bedroom. So if they still had some schoolwork to do, they would need to do that outside the bedroom. Technology can be very disruptive to sleep, not only in teens who might be interacting with their screens over the course of the entire night and staying up too late and then being awake periodically throughout the night to interact with it. But also with very young children, what we're seeing is that interacting with the screen itself, the act of interacting with the screen actually disrupts our kids' sleep. Infants will actually sleep, young toddlers will actually sleep more during the day if they're interacting with screens and have difficulty sleeping at night. And it is just some research that recently came out showing that even with our very young children, screen time can be very disruptive to sleep. Having said that, no technology 1 hour before bedtime is a great guideline to go with. No technology during meals. So even if you're going out to dinner, and that includes you as well, so out to dinner or in the home, meals should really be a time for the family to connect, for the kids to feel as if they're being heard and understood, which is really very fundamental to children feeling safe and secure. Technology is so interruptive and disruptive. We are role models to our children, so I encourage you to follow the same guidelines that, that you're providing for your children as well, so that you can model really good relationship with technology. No technology during important conversations. So if you are having a family meeting, or if you're having an important conversation with your child or your adolescent or young adult, ask them to please leave their phone in another room so that they're not interrupted. And you do the same as well. Also, it's a really great practice to create an unplugged area in your house where there isn't any technology, no screens, somewhere where everybody can go to play games, to sit down and have a conversation. I know that sounds really novel, having conversations, but I would encourage you to do that with your children on a regular basis. So those are just some hard stops, meaning that I don't think those should be negotiable, and they shouldn't necessarily be dependent on the child themselves. I think those are really good technology hygiene within the family. So when it comes to age-related guidelines, these guidelines are going to be somewhat flexible, depending on your children's age, their level of maturity, and their temperament. So, and these guidelines actually come out of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and with just a few modifications that I've made based on the experience that I've had in my clinical practice. So birth to 2 years, no screen time, except for video chatting. What's recommended is that from birth to 2 years old, no screen time. I know that if you have multiple children and you've got some young ones and some older ones, it's really, really challenging to implement something like that. Do the best you can. In an ideal world, our children would not be interacting in front of a screen until they're 2 years old. And that is even really quite young as well. So from approximately 2 years to 5 years old, anywhere from 0 to 1 hour a day, most of which should be interactive with another human being. Meaning that if you have a 3-year-old and they're interacting on a screen, ideally the time that they spend doing that, you want to have another warm human being next to them who's actually playing a game with them or talking with them as they're doing whatever it is they like to do on a screen. Elementary age children, well, we've got to start to factor in academic time as well. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about content, but academic time plus no more than 1 hour additional a day for elementary school age children. So that 1 hour additional can be recreational time. Again, ideally they're interacting with another human being, but certainly not as strict as it might be with a child who's between 2 and 5 years old. By middle school, we add in academic time plus 2 hours of additional screen time at the most. And now you're going to start to let your children start to interact with their screens independent of you at times. And then high school is academic time plus 2 to 3 hours of additional time. Understanding that adolescents use that time to do a lot of socializing these days as well, particularly under the circumstances that we're in. We also want to pay attention to one other thing in relation to the time our children are spending on the screen, and that is how much time they're spending multitasking. So there really actually is no such thing as multitasking when it comes to the neurology of the brain. What's actually happening, only one nerve cell will fire at any one given time. What's actually happening when we say multitasking is that you are jumping from one task to another task to another task to another task. So when your child and you have multiple screens up and you're going from one screen to the other screen and back to this screen and that screen, that's what we would label as multitasking. And there's some preliminary research out. It's not done on humans, it's done on rats, so we have to at some point bridge that gap. But what we're seeing is a pretty strong correlation between the overstimulation of the brain in the course of multitasking on a screen and the actual density and number of nerve cells in a particular part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is your central processing unit. It's kind of like your working memory where you're doing a lot of your processing. And we're seeing this in rats whose brains are taxed, all right, with very, very fast-paced programming. So when it comes to your children, pay attention to the amount of fast-paced programming that they're interacting with. So if they're quite young and they're engaged in programming that is moving very quickly, and there's a lot going on all at the same time, and they're having to process a lot of information from one moment to the next, you might want to try to counterbalance that, limit that time and counterbalance that with time involved with things online that are not quite so demanding from moment to moment. It's very fatiguing for the brain, and we don't know yet what the influence is on the developing brain. Our kids' brains develop, boys until they're 25 and girls until they're around 22. And we don't quite yet understand the influences that screen time is having on our children's brain development. But we do know that there appears to be some pretty measurable structural changes in the brain, and you guys can, I've got a detailed handout, you can request that if you would like. Okay, so why do we want to limit screen time with our children at any age? And one of the reasons is that we're seeing significant issues in our children's socio-emotional development with the amount of screen time that they're engaging in. And it is dependent on content as well, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's unequivocal that too much time in front of a screen is separating us from what is the most important aspect of our development as human beings, and that is our socio-emotional development, which happens face-to-face. It happens in the physical presence of one another. And that's challenging right now because that is quite limited. Don't worry, it's not going to have a permanent effect on your children's socio-emotional development. But certainly screen time, whether or not we're in the pandemic or not, too much of that over the course of a day and not enough of this kind of interaction where you're face to face with individuals and you're solving problems and you're having fun and you're experimenting and you're sharing and you're connecting. It does have a significant effect on your children's emotional health and wellness, as well as their social development, their ability to engage in conversation, their ability to process complex thoughts, and much more. So it's very important that we pay attention to the amount of time that our kids spend in front of a screen. All right, so how do we do this? Because I know you hear the guidelines and you're like, oh, well, God, that's great, Alicia, appreciate that. But that's impossible. That's not going to happen, especially during this time when we're faced with all kinds of challenges. Our kids are spending an inordinate amount of time doing their academics online. And in addition to that, we're busy, we're working from home. Our kids are left to their own devices. And what better way to know that your children are quiet and safe and they're sitting in the living room, not ripping up the house or getting themselves into trouble, so put them in front of a screen. So I understand the impulse, and I understand that the need to do that sometimes. I want to start very basic and fundamental with my suggestions on how to manage our kids' screen time. And that is with values. We've got to sit down have an adult conversation with our significant other, decide what our family values are, you know, understand what is most important to you. And remember that there is no substitute for real connection. There's no substitute. We were not doing well before the pandemic in relation to screen time in our kids, and we were seeing it in our children's emotional and mental health. And I see it in my practice. It's disturbing. I've been in private practice now over 20 years, and to see the shift and the change in these children is it's breathtaking. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, depression, difficulty with self-identification, understanding that we are imperfect and meant to be imperfect. We're flawed, and understanding that who we are. We're doing as teens a lot of self-identification over social media, which is not healthy, considering that nothing, and I'm going to say nothing because it's a cesspool, but really nothing is real on social media, and that's influencing our children's sense of self. So deciding on your values is a really good place to start in terms of where you want to establish those boundaries in your household. And explain to your children the importance of your values, all right, and that you value human interaction over technology. Educate your kids that technology is a tool to be used, not a lifestyle. And I'm really encouraged and hopeful around all of this. And in part, the pandemic is actually forcing some really positive change in our children. I'm getting a lot of teens that are coming in saying, I am so sick of all social media. I am so sick of sitting in front of a screen, because they've had to for their academics, and in addition to that, been so isolated from their friends, that they are really starting to hit critical mass in terms of their desire. So it isn't this mysterious thing that they want to be on all the time, that they live their lives through. They're starting to feel like, God, I don't want this anymore. I'm not getting what I need. I have teens that are actually making the decision to get off of all of that, all the social media stuff. And we meaning me and them, notice a significant difference in their mental health. Far less stress, far less anxiety, much happier, much more present. So explain to your children that technology is a tool and not a lifestyle, and that a little bit is okay. It's all right. It's fun. It's powerful. It's a wonderful thing if it's used as a tool. So also, what I encourage you to do is, particularly with kids that are in their later elementary school, elementary aged kids and beyond. So with the little guys, you're not going to be able to do what I'm going to suggest, but right around the, I'd say maybe fourth grade, fourth grade, you can start to establish these guidelines collaboratively with your children. I strongly encourage you to do that, because it's more likely that your children will be willing to adhere to them if they've been a part of the decision making. And you can just do it developmentally appropriately based on where your child is. But the opportunity is that you explain to your children what your family values are, and what you feel strongly that technology is a tool, not a lifestyle. And then ask them this question. Say to them, based on what we believe is important in our family, how much time do you think you should spend in front of a screen? And start the conversation there. Throw it out to them first and get them to start to think about it for themselves. Okay, we've got these values and these are important to us, and I have this thing that could be very competitive against those values. Where is that equilibrium? Where is that counterbalance? So start with that question. Be very open to what your kids say. If they say, 9 hours sounds great to me, the way that I encourage you to respond to that is just smile don't say, are you out of your mind? 9 hours, that's crazy. You're not gonna get 9 hours. Try your best not to make it contentious. Instead, just say, well, that's interesting, 9 hours. How many hours are there in a day that you're awake? Okay, well, maybe 13 hours. And here we've got this thing that's real important to us, which is human interaction. And you're spending 9 hours. That sounds like a lot. Do you think we could back off on that some? What do you think? And again, throw it back to them, get them to think about it. There's so much in that process that is healthy for your children. They're going to learn complex problem solving. They're going to learn collaboration. They're going to learn how to solve problems when someone else may disagree with them. So there's probably going to be some conflict resolution, and you're going to connect with your child on a positive way around a really challenging topic that can be very contentious between parents and children. So structure and routine is really important now more than ever, but always. So not just structure around technology use, but structure in general in the household. So as you're trying to manage this time, this summertime with all the kids at home, and if it's starting to feel out of control, sit down with your family, create a structure. It doesn't have to be authoritarian in nature. Every moment is accounted for, definitely not. But make sure that you're all making decisions around what times of the day in general you tend to be doing certain things and what your expectations are of your children that way. By creating structure and routine, you're establishing an environment that enables kids to thrive and thrive even during a time of adversity like this. So it's absolutely necessary when the world is turned upside down like it is right now, for your children to know that in the household there are expectations, there are boundaries, there is structure to the day. It creates a sense of safety, of hope, of calm, of connectedness. Also remember that boredom is the birth of creativity, and it's okay for your kids to be bored, and let them flop around, let them do a whole lot of nothing. They don't have to be busy all the time. They're going to drive you crazy. That's part of parenting, and now is an intense part of parenting. Your children will not fall apart. They're not going to be permanently harmed because they're not being entertained every minute of every day. It's actually incredibly healthy for them to entertain themselves. Even if it's with simple stuff and it doesn't appear like they're doing much of anything, they're actually learning things that are critically important to them over the course of their lifetime. This is a great time to change the household in relation to technology and your children's play. So children should be spending most of their time in free play and very little time playing on the computer. Under the worst case scenario, the best thing that you can do, if the best thing is that you can do, is counterbalance. So if your children have to spend a significant amount of time in front of the screen for whatever reason, just make an attempt to counterbalance that with human interaction. And sometimes that's the best we can do, and that's okay too. Your kids are going to be primarily influenced over the course of their upbringing by patterns in their environment. So if they have a week where they've got a lot of screen time, that's okay. If they have 6 weeks where they have a lot of screen time, that isn't. That starts to establish a pattern that starts to change the not only the relationship between you and your children, but the way that your children are interacting with the world. So don't be overly concerned if there are times where you need to plop your kids in front of the screen for a little while and get some things done. Okay. Wow. All right. So content. Let's talk about content. We're going to do so pretty quickly here because we're fast running out of time. What I want to say about content is pay very close attention to what your children are doing online at any age. Remember that your kids at different ages are actually processing information very differently. So, for example, children and these are kids younger than the teenage years. So want to distinguish between children and teenagers. Children are a unique audience, and they're different from adolescents and adults. They don't passively absorb information. They bring less real-world knowledge and experience to their understanding, and they're much more willing to believe what it is that they're seeing or hearing. So there's a lot of toxicity going on out there on the internet and through media and social media. And we want to be very, very careful and cautious about what our children are being exposed to. Also, understand that if you know that your children has been exposed to something that you feel is developmentally inappropriate, have a conversation with them and help them understand it based on their age, because that kind of, we're seeing some secondary PTSD with kids that are being exposed to violence online and graphic sexual content online at very early ages. And they're actually experiencing secondary PTSD from the experiences of that. So yeah, let's see, what else did I, adolescence is actually a very unique time in our children's cognitive development. And so we want to treat adolescents differently. You want to start to have some in-depth conversations with them as they're interacting with things online, so that they start to understand what it is to distinguish between what's true and what's not true. We call this media literacy, and if you Google it, you'll get all kinds of suggestions on how to become more media literate. And I encourage you all to become more media literate yourself and to start teaching your children how to increase their media literacy, so that they can process what it is that they see online, and also distinguish for themselves what's healthy for them and what isn't healthy for them to be interacting with on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm going to go 5 more minutes and just talk now specifically about some things that you can do to just create an environment that's healthy for your children right now. So we mentioned structure and routine, very important. We talked about having some grace with yourself and with your kids and your significant other. We're not at our best, so we need to actually slow down emotionally. So right now, we all have this heightened sense of anxiety. We'll call it anxiety. This sort of low level of anxiety, more so than we would normally be carrying around with us. It's a little more than stress. So it's this agitation that we're carrying around. So it's kind of like, imagine that your cup is already, say, 1/3 of the way full of anxiety. And then something else happens in your life and it can fill up really quickly. So maybe you see something online, or there's communications online that come your way, and those communications trigger you. And it's very easy right now to be reactive, to go into that fight or flight mode where you just feel like, I can't handle this anymore. I can't believe this is happening. Can you believe this person said this? Or can you believe that? What we want to do with ourselves, and to encourage our children too, to just slow down emotionally. Recognize that, hey, I'm not always in my right mind right now, and I've got to take some time. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a look at that thing again a little bit later. I'm going to process it before I react, before I post something, before I call somebody, before I get into some conflict or some argument with somebody else. So slowing down emotionally is really important. Counterbalancing the stress and anxiety that we're experiencing with fun. So, and I mean fun like silly fun, fun that is mindless fun, whatever you can come up with for yourselves and for your kids, is really, really important right now. Calming our nervous system, so our midbrain, which is where our reward system is, it's kind of where our emotional center of our brain is. Calming that midbrain is really important because it's at that heightened state. So we can do that through daily self-care, exercise, eating right, sleeping well, having fun, laughing, connecting any way we can, even if it's over technology, um, meditation, things like that. Very important to spend a little bit of time every day calming your nervous system, even if it's just breathing. Just sit with your kids and say, we're going to breathe for 3 minutes. That's it. Set the timer and just take deep breaths together for 3 minutes and then move on with your day. Setting realistic expectations. And we call this, and what I mean by that is we really shouldn't be trying to be superstars right now in the things that we're doing. We need to recognize that we have limited capacity because of the stress and anxiety that we're experiencing. And what we want to do is we want to do what's called satisficing. And when you satisfice, you acknowledge that your best today may be different than your best tomorrow. I did a presentation last week and I just felt I was not at my best. And that was uncomfortable for me, but I had to accept the fact that I was really depleted that day. I was really just emotionally depleted. So acknowledging that and acknowledging that with your children, recognize that your kids, they can actually perform. You can lower your expectations right now. I'm giving you permission to lower your expectations, not just for yourself, but for your children as well. It's healthy to do that. And even in an average time when we don't have a pandemic, it's extremely healthy to bring your expectations down enough that you'll notice that your performance actually goes up. So staying away from things that are overstimulating to your system. Could be food, it could be movies that are just like shoot 'em up, overstimulating kind of movies. It could be sound, noise, heat, whatever it happens to be that might kind of just jack you up or your children. Just try to limit that, stay away from it as much as possible. Obviously limiting social media and the news, we all know that. Teaching your kids to reframe, it's called cognitive restructuring, and teaching them to actually take a situation that's creating anxiety for them and to think about it in a different way. And that there is so much opportunity and so much hope in the experience that we're having in this country right now. And you can choose to connect to that. You can choose to communicate that to your children. You can choose to balance what it is they may be experiencing online in conversations with their peers, that the world is falling apart, and actually help them understand that chaos is an opportunity for change, and change has been coming, and let's get our head around that. What can we do as a family to support change? Staying flexible, which is not always easy, particularly when you're experiencing anxiety. It's easy to get very rigid because you're afraid, you're fear-based, so you just lock up, you lock down. What you want to do is you want to just try and work on your flexibility. Blow through your emotions. Just allow yourself to flow. Try your best not to get stuck. So you're going to have moments where you feel horrible. You're going to have moments where you feel stressed and anxious, hopeless, and you're going to have moments where you actually feel great. Some people are feeling great throughout this time as well. Flow through your emotions. Try not to get stuck for a length of time. That's what's really healthy for us to do no matter what is happening. And finally, I want to say that we want to accept that we're in a time of intense change, that change is inevitable. It's messy, it's ugly, it's scary, and we don't know so much right now about how this is all going to turn out, and we're not going to be able to tell this story. So I want to leave you with an analogy, and this is the last thing that I'll say, and then we'll have questions. I want to leave you with an analogy that you can present to your kids as well to help them keep a perspective on what's going on and stay as healthy as we can through this experience. And here's the analogy. I don't know if any of you have ever been to museums, like the Louvre in Paris. This is where I got this idea. They have these tapestries that are just enormous. and you can't see them. They're so big that you can't see them. You have to just look at pieces of them. And what's so interesting about these tapestries is that you can step back as far as you can in the room and you still can't see exactly what it is they're representing. And I feel like that is akin to the experience that we're having right now. This experience is bigger than each of us individually. It's bigger than us collectively as a nation, and it's bigger than us collectively as a world. We can't see this tapestry. It hasn't even been woven in completion yet. So one of the choices that we have is where we're going to look on the tapestry. So some people, sometimes you're going to need to step closer and kind of look at what's just right in front of you. And maybe that's you. Maybe it's your family. Sometimes you're going to look up to the right, or you're going to look down to the left, or you're going to step back and you're going to try to see a little bit more of what's going on. Recognize that that is a choice. And that choice is critically important to how you experience life during these times. If you choose, and this is, you start to communicate to your children, if you choose to spend a lot of time in front of a screen on content that is not healthy for us, you are going to influence how you see and experience your reality right now. And it's going to bleed into your relationships. It's going to bleed into your performance at work. It's going to bleed into your sleep. You name it, it's going to take over. So make responsible decisions for yourself. Look at the part of the tapestry that you feel you need to focus on, but be consciously aware that you're making that choice, and help your children understand the choices that they're making are going to have a direct influence on the quality of their life. So I'm going to stop there and invite Genevieve back in, and let's have some questions and see how we do from here.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Alicia. I appreciated that analogy at the end. That's really helpful, that we can zoom in very close so we can pull back out. That was helpful. So we do have a couple of questions already in the Q&A, and I would just encourage everybody watching to, if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A for us down at the bottom of your screen. So the first one is, would you include TV in the no technology before bedtime hard stop, or in the additional 2 to 3 hours that teenagers get outside of school time? And by this, we mean as in binging on Netflix in front of the computer, etc., that type of thing.
Yes, TV is included in that. So yes, for all of us actually, no screen time an hour before bed is going to improve the quality of your sleep. And also in the 2 to 3 hours, or whatever the limitations are that you're going to place on your children, that time should be included as well. So it isn't they get to play 2 hours of video games and then watch a 2-hour movie and then do something else online, spend online time with their friends. Yeah, so you want to include any screen time whatsoever. So yes, TV included.
So I have a few questions that some people gave us beforehand, and one of them along these lines is, normally I'd be fairly strict about screen time and have these kinds of limits, but during this COVID time, can I loosen up on those limits at all? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely you can loosen up. Just recognize that you're going to be establishing different habits during this period of time, and on the other side of this, you're going to have to break those habits again. So be aware of that, and if that's okay with you, just make sure that you're loosening up to a reasonable degree, but not going too far within the context of your family values, because you will at some point want to pull back on those, and the kids are they're going to have created different habits, and that could be challenging. So, but yes, absolutely, we're in unprecedented times, and a little more screen time, particularly for middle school age children and teenagers. I would say they're more mature, their brains are a little more fully developed. with the younger kids, I'd be a little cautious about that, but absolutely.
Okay. We have a couple of questions about content as well. So this one's fairly specific. Thoughts on Fortnite for 12 to 15-year-olds? Do you have thoughts on Fortnite?
I have very strong thoughts on this, and they're very. It's very rare I have black and white perspectives on things, but I have to tell you, this Fortnite is so addictive. I am completely and utterly against it. And I know that the kids, you know, they fool you into thinking that they're socializing because they're interacting with their peers while they're playing and they're talking, and I get that, but there is nothing good about it. I just have to tell you, there is nothing good about it. We're seeing decrements in empathy with our children that are playing these games. We're seeing just downright addiction. So these games, well, just screen time and content in general is addictive. It stimulates the reward center in your midbrain and gives you a boost of dopamine, makes you feel good in the moment, and then you crash afterwards. And you see that with your kids. When your kids spend too much time doing these kinds of things, you'll notice that their mood changes. When they get off, they're impatient, they're short on temper, they don't want to listen, they're confrontational. It's just so not good for our children. And we don't need to wait for all the research to come out. We're seeing changes in the structures of the brain, like the amygdala, which is the emotional center. We're seeing that it gets bigger in kids that do a lot of gaming. We're seeing actual, so what happens when your children are gaming, their prefrontal cortex, which is where we do all our executive function or complex processing, actually goes offline, and the emotional centers of the brain kick in. So we're seeing decrements in the development of the prefrontal cortex in relation to spending time, and significant time. You know, the studies are showing, or looking at people that are spending significant amounts of time on these games. But we don't need to wait for the research to come out in 10, 15 years to know that this is just not healthy for our children. And they are going to push back, oh my gosh, because you're creating a social issue for them because they're socializing over these games. And of course, that's very, very important. It's one of the most important things for our children to be engaged in doing. Now, I'm going to now counterbalance all of what I just said with the fact that we're in this time, and I appreciate that these kids may be spending time playing these games because that's one of the only ways that they're socializing with one another. So do you want to shut that down? Probably not at this time, but you do want to be very careful about the amount of time that you allow your kids to play. So hour after hour after hour, no. Stay within the guidelines. 1 hour a day, okay. That's relatively acceptable during this time. But yeah, you want to be very, very careful about where those boundaries are in terms of the amount of time. In a perfect world, they don't do it at all.
So what do we do when our kids are doing, what if our kids playing Fortnite quite a bit right now? How do we go from where we are right now to something that is a little closer to what you're describing? Do we quit cold turkey? Do we wean them down a little bit at a time? How do we even broach this subject with our child who's likely to be resistant to that idea?
All right, so good question. First of all, accept the resistance. It's going to happen. There's no way that you're going to be able to back off on this without your kid throwing a fit. And if you back off on it and your kid really dysregulates, then you know you're doing the right thing. All right? If they're really super reactive, like irrationally so, and they start, whatever your child's irrational reactions are, and it's pretty significant, then that is evidence that you are doing the right thing, because that isn't normal. And they will, I don't mean normal in that kids don't react that way. I'm saying in relation to something like that, that reaction is telling you that the brain needs it. The brain wants it. It's like, I gotta have it. And particularly if that reaction it exists over the course of several days, then you know you're doing the right thing. So should you go cold turkey, or should you try to wean them down off of it? You can go either way. If you got a couple of days, 3 days to put a lot of energy and attention into your child, you could go cold turkey. They're gonna also go cold turkey so on you. So be prepared for that. If you ideally you could do it over time, over the course of a couple of weeks. And the way that you talk to your children about this is both an adult decision and something I want to do with you. And the reason it's an adult decision is that I have a responsibility to do what's good for you and good for your brain and your body. And this isn't, to the degree that you're doing it. And so this is going to be uncomfortable for you, but over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to get you down to an hour a day. And I want to understand from you how you think we should do that. Again, collaboration. And they're going to say, well, I don't want to do it I'm not going to answer that because I don't want to do it. So, do whatever you want to do. And then you just stay calm, try not to judge, try not to shame your children. Come from a place of knowledge and love and just say, look, this is going to happen. That's non-negotiable. That's a hard stop for me. I want to work out with you how we do it. What are some ideas that you have? Here are my ideas. And then there must be, in addition to this, a piece of proactive consequences. So what I mean by that is establishing the consequences of them sneaking around, because the kids are really clever. They'll figure out how to get what they want when it comes to technology, and they know more than we do most of the time. So you want to have consequences in place ahead of time and agree on those consequences with your children. Establish them together as a team. Say, okay, what happens if we set the timer for an hour and I happen to not be paying attention and you go for 3 hours? What are the consequences going to be for you on that? And then make sure that you follow through on those consequences lawfully. And when you set consequences up proactively with your children, what it means is that you don't have to be the enforcer. So this is how it works. You say you agree on an hour a day, and your child, and you have consequences around that. Like, for example, they lose the next day. They lose the hour for the next day if they go over, or they lose the number of hours that they go over, the amount of time they go over going forward. So if they went 2 hours over, then they lose 2 hours, which means in that case they lose 2 days. The consequences need to fit the crime, so you're not going to just like shut it down and go, that's it. You're not having any screen time for 6 months. So the proactive consequences, what it allows you to do is in the moment when they have broken the contract, in a sense, what you say to them is, I'm really sorry that you made that choice. You're not implementing the consequences like an authoritarian. They've made the choice to accept the consequences. So you just say, gosh, I'm really sorry you made that choice because I know how much you love interacting with your friends and playing Fortnite. Now the next 2 days, you're not going to have that, that you're not going to be able to do that. Oh, well, you should let me because I set the table yesterday, and they'll try and take it sideways, and you just stay in the lane. You just stay calm and say, you know what, sweetheart, I understand. It's uncomfortable. Maybe you'll make a different choice next time. I'd like to see you make a different choice because I know how much you like to interact with your friends. So you want to do things proactively so that you're not the enforcer, they're the chooser. They're choosing the consequences. So they start to understand the connection between their choices, right, and the consequences of those choices, which is a beautiful thing to understand when you're an adult. It's really important. And we're missing that step with our kids these days. And so it's a really wonderful opportunity. Anytime you have something like this, you need to tighten up or you need to establish boundaries around, new boundaries around. If you do it collaboratively and you establish proactive consequences, your child will start to learn that they're responsible for themselves and you're not responsible for them. And you're also not responsible for fixing things for them. If they make a mistake or they break a rule and it was a hard stop, then the consequences are just in place. It's like, I'm not telling you that you can't, you chose that consequence. So anyway, that's my 2 pennies worth on that.
That's great. It's applicable to a lot of different kinds of situations beyond screen time too. Another couple of content questions. How flexible or unflexible do you think we should be with the Y7 rating? Is it okay for 5-year-olds? So I think this probably applies to games and maybe shows that have ratings for different age groups. So, and I think this, if we're talking about Y7 for 5-year-olds, what about PG-13 for 10-year-olds? I think that's a kind of we could talk about that.
The ratings are established for a reason, and they do consult. They consult with a lot of professionals and experts in child development to establish these ratings. So I would look at that first. I would look at the rating first and try to understand perhaps why it is that the rating is as it is. Obviously, if you have multiple children, it's likely that, let's say you have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, very likely the 5-year-old is going to be exposed to what the 7-year-old is doing. Not the end of the world, for sure. The other thing to consider is your child. You've got to also consider your children. And each one of your children is going to be different in the way that they naturally interact with the world. So, for example, let's say you have a child that is 5 years old that seems to have some attentional issues. And the programming for 7-year-olds compared to the programming for age-appropriate apps for your child is that the 7-year-old programs they move a lot faster. There's a lot more detail in the content of them. I would recommend that you stick with what has been determined age appropriate for your child, because that kind of programming may actually agitate the attentional issues and also may influence their ability to attend over the course of their childhood. So that's one example of how you might even take them down a notch in terms of the content and go more towards the, I don't know if they're distinguished this way, but the 4-year-old content, like a year younger. So another example is, let's say you have a child who's very sensitive. There are people, they're like 10 to 12% of the population, and they're considered highly sensitive individuals. And if you have a child that seems to be just really sensitive to sounds, and not on the spectrum sensitive, but just in general sensitive, you might want to take a look at the content in relation to that as well. And maybe the 7-year-old content is a little too advanced for them in terms of what's happening on the screen. And you notice that when they're interacting with that, they tend to get off and they're just emotionally disrupted. So you want to take that into consideration as well. There was something else I wanted to say around that. Let me see if I can remember now.
While you're thinking, I'll just mention Common Sense Media has a great website that I think it's a helpful resource for trying to evaluate why programs are rated the way they are, and then they will sometimes give recommendations so they can help with that type of thing that you're talking about. If you have a sensitive child and you're looking at a rating, you can at least understand why the content you're looking at was given that rating help you make a decision whether it's right for your child.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful website too, by the way, Common Sense Media. And I have a list of resources that I can also provide to you. So
that'd be wonderful. So we're running over time a little bit. We have 2 questions left if you want
yeah.
to try to get to these quickly. So the first one is, what can we do about the schoolwork that is, even before COVID, almost entirely online? They spend so much time on screens, both in school and out, but what options do we have?
Yeah, this is such a challenging question. And this question is reminding me of what I wanted to say, and that is that there is no research indicating a relationship between learning online and advanced learning. Okay, so there is no data suggesting that learning online somehow enhances learning. So even the apps that say, oh, you know, this is blah, 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 all these claims, we don't have data to back that up. And they may have one, you know, one research, like one piece of research that shows a strong correlation, but we don't have anything lawful to suggest that learning online enhances learning in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you learn better when you're engaged with all of your senses, and you can't do that online. So having said that, what can we do about this with the kids spending an inordinate amount of time, even prior to the pandemic, learning online? And I don't have a good answer to this other than doing your absolute best to counterbalance. So for example, with younger kids that are not doing as much socializing online, what I would recommend is, if they're spending a lot of time on their academics, maybe they have little to no time recreationally online. That's okay. They're going to figure. So one of the arguments against this, and I don't know if it still stands, but is that, well, they're not going to learn how to, you know, do everything they need to do to start kindergarten. These kids figure this stuff out in a New York minute. You don't have to worry about that. And they'll get exposure through their friends anyway when they're at their friends' houses. Again, we don't, other than also, I mean, you could be advocating with your school system, but it's so entrenched now that it's going to be very challenging to eradicate screen time academically. Just do your best to counterbalance it, I think, at this point in time. And if you see that your child is really had enough and they're having physical reactions to the screen time, they're having stomach aches, headaches, they're getting fatigued, you notice that they're just sort of, you know, numb, because this can all happen with too much of this. Even this, you know, where we see one another, you shut it down and communicate with the school that, you know what, last night my child had it. It was too much screen time, and I made a decision as a parent to shut it down, and you know, just let us know how you want us to handle the assignments that they didn't get done. Don't be afraid to do that for your children, particularly during this period of time when emotions are high and demands are high, and our kids are feeling disconnected from the most important thing in their lives, which is being with their peers. Don't be afraid. Lower your performance expectations. Put their mental health and their socio-emotional health first. And if you have to advocate for them at school, do it. That, for, you know, emphasizing their socio-emotional health.
Right. It's part of that, what you were talking about earlier about showing ourselves and our kids a little grace.
Yes.
I think it fits with that. All right, here's the last question. What are your feelings about Minecraft?
All right, so I know Minecraft, you know, there's a lot going on that stimulates the brain in complex ways. Again, recognize that it is addictive, and look for signs of addiction when your kids are spending time on games like that. So if they have a very difficult time separating from the game when you require them to, if they're doing things like, I've had children who won't get up and go to the bathroom, and they'll actually go to the bathroom in their pants because they don't want to stop. If you notice changes in the way that your children are interacting with you when they're offline, and they're just not themselves. I've had parents who, I've worked with families to limit these things when they've gotten out of hand. And the parents will come in 3 weeks later in tears, and they'll say, I didn't realize that I had lost my child to this game, and I have my child back, and this will never happen again. So be very, very cautious with any of these games. With Minecraft, it's that always the next level and the next layer, and I'm going to do this, and you get fooled as a parent into thinking that they're learning so much because they're doing research about the codes and the this and the, oh my God, and they're applying these things. And just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it's healthy for them and that somehow it's making them smarter. So these are all the skills that they're learning through these games. They can learn just as well and just as easily in everyday life in a more healthy way. So they're not missing out on something. They're not getting smarter because they're interacting with these games. So just be very, very careful about the amount of time that these kids are using to interact with these games.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. This has been very helpful. I think we could keep talking about this all day, but we probably need to wrap it up. We're a little over time, but I really appreciate you spending the extra time and answering everybody's questions. This was very helpful.
It's my pleasure. And if anybody has any questions or they need any resources or there's anything I can do to help, just shoot me an email through my website or directly. And and I've got a really detailed handout that you guys probably want to get. I'm happy to send that to you. You can copy it. You can send it out to people. I don't care. Do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, if you send me the handout, I'll send it to everybody who registered for the webinar. And when we post the webinar online, we can post the handout with it.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
Yeah, so that'll be great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who watched today and everybody who submitted questions. We appreciate your participation. Please do have a look at our website just to keep up with our programs and see our past webinars. Follow us on Facebook. We share lots of helpful resources there. Shouldn't be saying this at the end of our talk on screen time. Don't check our Facebook page compulsively, just every now and then. And of course our YouTube channel where we post our webinars. So this is the conclusion of our webinar. I'll be ending the session in a moment. This is actually our final program for this school year. We're going to take a little break on our programs until the fall, but we'll still be here on our website and our Facebook page. And feel free to email. There's an email address on our website. You can send me questions. If there's information you need, we'll find it for you anytime during the summer. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm gonna end this webinar shortly, which means your screen will go blank, dark. It feels very abrupt when it ends, but we thank you so much for being here today. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.